Thank you very much for welcoming my digital self. Hello everybody, this talk is about the digital society. So, we usually think of problems in terms of external problems, such as deep impacts, volcano outbreaks, hurricanes, or also tsunamis. But these days we're facing new kinds of challenges. Systemic instabilities, as we see them in financial markets, in economic crisis, in social and political instabilities, or also organized crime or the spreading of emerging diseases. We must realize that we are living in a new world. And that's because we have networked the world, everything has become interdependent. We now have a global exchange of people, money, goods, information, and ideas, and that's fantastic. But on the other hand, that has also created pathways for disaster spreading. So here is an example, a video that shows bankruptcy cascades in the banking sector. And as you can see over here, within a short time period, hundreds of banks are failing, and that causes losses of hundreds of billions of dollars. So that's certainly something that shouldn't happen. And so the question is, what can we do about it? So if we knew more about the world, with all the big data of human activities, what could we do with it? Could we predict the future? Could we build a crystal ball? Well, here is a nice quote of Dirk, the CIA Chief Technology Officer, who said, "You're already a walking sensor platform." So in principle, we might think of creating something like a God's eyes view. Can we know everything? And can we turn this knowledge into power? Because we always say knowledge is power, so can we be almighty? Would so much information enable a wise king or a benevolent dictatorship? So Singapore might be seen as an example for such a way of governing a state. Here is a quote from one of my essays. I'm saying there, if God didn't exist, people would invent one. The development of human civilization requires mechanisms promoting cooperation and social order. One of these mechanisms is based on the idea that everything we do is seen and judged by God. Bad deeds will be punished, while good ones will be rewarded. The information age has now fueled the dream that godlike omniscience and omnipotence can be created by man. And in fact, if you Google for Google is God, you find that there is a church of Google and a number of pages that basically support the idea that this is going on. Could we go a step further, basically? How would we create this magic wand that would be able to change the world in the way we would like it? Well, basically we would have to manipulate people's choices, and that could perhaps be done by personalized information and recommender systems. However, we must be aware that such recommender systems can undermine the wisdom of crowds. And maybe the difficulties of Democrats and Republicans to find consensus and understand each other are already an example that shows that recommender systems are also having harmful side effects. So are we already living in a filter bubble? We must also be aware that a powerful tool like a crystal ball and a magic wand that fails in unpredictable ways is a dangerous tool. So, do we already have a well-working crystal ball and magic wand? If that was the case, then most likely the outcome of the war on Afghanistan would have been different. The same thing with the war on Iraq. And we shouldn't have had a financial and economic crisis like this. We should have been able to predict the Arab Spring. We should have been able to avoid the situation that we find in Syria these days. We should have been able to foresee the situation in Ukraine and also avoid the situation we're in regarding Crimea. There are actually reasons why the crystal ball and the magic wand often fail. So There are errors of first, second, and third kind. Errors of first kind of false positive, false negative, and of third kind is basically choice of wrong models. So I'd say big data, yes, we want to have it, but we need to have a better quality control. Transparency in scientific institutions will be crucial for this. Let me give an example. So we now have pre-crime programs in many countries, and the question is, how successful is it? For sure, you have discovered many more criminals, and you can see it in the numbers of people that are in prison. In fact, the USA has 10 times more people in prison than most European countries. Did it make US more safe than Europe? I'm not sure about it, so we need to think about these things. We also know that there are millions of suspects, and we're not sure so much about how well these kind of instruments are protecting us from terrorism. The other thing is that we've had a war on drugs and arrested millions of people, but in the end we had to understand that this was not very effective as well. So we need to be careful about using these different tools. We need to collect more experience. Here is another example of what can go wrong. In many cases, there is a large sensitivity to the variation of model parameters. And so, if you do many measurements, as has been done over here in a semiconductor production plant of Infineon Technologies, I was at that time producing some of the most advanced technology in the world, it turned out that you couldn't interpolate between the measurement data because of this huge amount of sensitivity that you see over here. In fact, the prediction was very bad, and so the productivity was much below the prediction. Nevertheless, it was possible for us to come up with a better way of going about throughput optimization, which was based on what we call the slower is faster effect. That means we slowed down certain kinds of processes to make them more controllable and better coordinated. And that indeed increased the capacity by more than 30%. So this is somehow related with the fact that systems like these are complex systems. Complex dynamical systems are characterized by self-organization, which is often counterintuitive. Here's an example where self-organization works very well. So you can see pedestrian counterflows and the formation of lanes of uniform walking direction. So the different directions are separated from each other. And it happens automatically, like Adam Smith's invisible hand is creating order in a magic way. This is what we call self-organization. However, sometimes things go wrong. The density is too high, then basically the crowd dynamics can get out of control, and there might be a crowd disaster, killing many people, although nobody wants to harm anybody. We know also that complex systems are hard to predict. Weather forecasts are a good example. We know that they are only useful on a short term, and only we can rely on them in a probabilistic way. So, say there would be 60% rain tomorrow, but we cannot be sure about what will really happen. And this is not because of a lack of data, but it's because of the internal dynamics of this kind of system. In this case, turbulence is restricting predictability. Here is another nice example. It should be easy to drive in a circle. In fact, we all have had driving school, and so given all the information that the drivers have over here, perfect sign, it shouldn't be a problem. But now we've seen that we had the emergence of a so-called phantom traffic jam. And unfortunately, we don't get rid of this phantom traffic jam anymore. If we would now stop the drivers and ask them, what has happened? They would probably say, well, there was this stupid driver in front of me who didn't know how to drive a car. But having a mathematics and physics background, we know that this is not the explanation. In fact, if the density crosses a certain critical threshold, then small variations in the speed will amplify and will cause a cascade effect, so that in the end cars are stopped, although nobody wants this to happen. This is an example of systemic instability, where we seem to have all the information and the technology that seems to be necessary to control that situation. Everybody behaves properly, but still things get out of control. So apparently we need to avoid that systems get into this parameter regime. Attempts to control complexity are often counterproductive. So here is an example which shows that the most effective measure to increase air safety was not more sophisticated technology. It's important, of course, but the most effective measure was to establish a non-hierarchical culture where the pilot could be questioned. Here is another example regarding Fukushima, and the final report stressed that the cause of the nuclear meltdown was our reflexive obedience, our reluctance to question authority. So, applying too much power may destroy self-organization, and we don't often know enough to replace it by top-down control. So what can we do? Well, actually, there are alternatives, and guided self-organization is better. Here's just one example. Chaos control is an example of minimally invasive approaches into the system. So you can stabilize the systems by very small interference at the right points in time. Altogether, I often think that we are trying to solve 21st century problems with 20th century approaches. And we should listen to Albert Einstein, who said, "We cannot solve our problems with the same kind of thinking that created them." So, how should we go about it? Well, I think it's important to recognize the success of a country is not so much an issue of power, but of the design of the systems. So here is an example of a system which is prone to cascade effects. A single perturbation can mess up the whole system, can create chain reactions that are hardly controllable. Systems shouldn't be designed in this way. In fact, in those networked global systems that we have created, it's very important that we basically built in engineered breaking points to stop cascades. Unfortunately, in the financial system we didn't have this, and therefore I often say it's important that social scientists and economists would work together with engineers and also natural scientists. These problems can be fixed. Fortunately, complexity science allows one to understand the counterintuitive behavior of complex systems. So let's take the example of traffic again. We have an analytical theory, in fact, that allows us to understand the conditions under which different kinds of traffic states can occur. And this theory, even though this is about a nonlinear complex system, is even predictive. So we can actually forecast the delay times. We only cannot forecast the exact moment of the traffic breakdown, because that depends on random perturbations. However, note that by establishing suitable interaction mechanisms, which we might call rules of the game, a complex system will self-organize bottom-up in a desirable way. So that means to go away from regulation, or in this case, even over-regulation, that's a photo taken in Germany, towards a situation that enables people to do the right thing. In this case, a roundabout. Here's a nice video I took in Egypt. And you can see that although we have a high diversity of participants over here, cars, pedestrians, even donkeys, buses, everything, nobody has to stop over here. So why is that? Because there's a special design. You can see that we have unidirectional traffic flows over here, and also on the other side unidirectional traffic flow in the opposite direction. But in between there is a small buffer that allows people to adjust so that they would arrive at the time where they would find a gap in the traffic flow. This is how systems should be designed, allowing people to self-organize. And in fact, we can help those systems. So information systems can, for example, allow us to overcome congestion. At the moment, I'm showing you a computer simulation of this annoying stop-and-go waves that you're well familiar with. But then eventually we'll turn this car into a helicopter, and it will allow us to see what's the reason for these annoying stop-and-go waves. What we'll see is that it's an on-ramp where there are a number of cars that are trying to squeeze themselves into the traffic flow, and these cause small perturbations which are then amplified and cause the stop-and-go waves. We're now accelerating the presentation, but the inflow stays the same all the time. We'll then switch on a traffic assistance system, which is based on a radar sensor in the cars that measures distances and relative velocities and drives the cars in an automatic way, in a way that creates a core collective stabilization of the traffic flow and slightly increases the capacity. So as you can see, now we have free traffic flow. If interactions are the problem, we need to change the interactions to fix the problem. And here is another example of a case study I've been involved in. As you may remember, years back there were many crowd disasters at the Jamarat Bridge close to Mecca. And that hasn't happened for a number of years because the system was totally reorganized. So in particular, there was a real-time information feedback in the system, and a unidirectional flow organization, a scheduling program, and many things more that contributed to a better safety of the system. Well, on the other hand, wrong institutional settings, such as anonymous exchange, random or homogeneous interactions promote the erosion of cooperation. So, global warming, believe it or not, might be seen as an example. Environmental pollution, overfishing, or environmental exploitation. These are old problems. For decades, if not hundreds of years, are we struggling with these problems. They're known as social dilemma situations. And in these social dilemma situations, cooperation would be desirable. Unfortunately, it's unstable, as the free traffic flow has been unstable in the previous traffic circle example. So what can we do? What's kind of the driver assistance system for these social dilemma situations? Well, in fact, there are a number of different mechanisms that promote cooperation and social order, and we can pick one or several and combine them with each other. So maybe the first one that human societies have come up with is genetic favoritism. That means helping your relatives. And that's basically changing the prisoner's dilemma or social dilemma situation into something else. That means the payoff matrix of the game is changed. It's a game changer, as taxes can also change the game. But there are other mechanisms as well. So direct reciprocity is another mechanism, or peer punishment. We punish each other for not complying with certain social norms, for example. Or pool punishment. We pay into a pot, and that pot is being used in order to pay for the police. That would do the punishment for us. However, attempts to control complexity are often very expensive, and in fact, the regulation that we have today requires many institutions, and those institutions cost money. And now we are in a situation where most industrialized countries have a level of public debt of 100% or sometimes even 200% of GDP. So, can we pay for this forever, or do we need to change the way we're going about these problems? What are our alternatives anyway? So, in fact, there are other mechanisms that I think would be more suited for a globalized world. namely reputation systems and what we call meritocratic matching, can provide institutional frameworks to overcome tragedies of the commons and create societal benefits. In fact, we can see that reputation systems are very quickly spreading on the web, like wildfire. So they must be good for something. And in fact, it turns out that reputation systems are good for buyers and for sellers. Buyers would find better products, higher quality, more satisfaction. Sellers would be able to sell their products at a higher price. So that is something now we should actually use much more in all the systems. Meritocratic matching is another mechanism that can do the job. So you can see over here that under normal conditions, the level of cooperation would drop down to 0 in the social dilemma situation. However, by this particular kind of matching, it turns out that we can get the system into a situation where we will be driven up to a very high level of cooperation. That means everyone can be better off. A very surprising finding. So, what challenge should we choose now after the discovery of the Higgs particle? I think we should do this. We can make Adam Smith's vision of the invisible hand come true after 300 years. And how do we do this? We can combine cybernetics and complexity theory with real-time data to create self-regulating systems. And then systems could basically work like these systems known from nature, which have a beautiful organization based on self-organization. So that would require us, however, to build up a sensor network. In fact, the Internet of Things can be used for this, if we operate it in the right way. So information and communication technologies allow us to create these self-regulating systems. And we could use them to craft new instruments to explore the world. Future ICT has proposed to create in particular 3 instruments. The first one is being called the planetary nervous system. So this is to measure the state of the world in real time and to turn data into information that's useful. Then the living Earth simulator would take these data and do computer simulations of certain kinds of situations that would inform us about possible implications, also possible side effects, opportunities and risks of decisions we might take. We turn information into knowledge. And finally, the global participatory platform would open it up for everybody to create a benefit for politics, for business, for science, and for citizens. And that would turn knowledge into wisdom, crowd wisdom. I will argue a bit more why this is necessary. But before I do that, I'd like to repeat the statement that data is the new oil. But we should add that models are the new gold, and participation creates social capital. So we need these 2 extra dimensions. How would it work? Well, first of all, the planetary nervous system would be able to do tailored measurements, and that would be much better than the data mining and machine learning approach that we have today. So we could actually measure the social footprint, we could measure social capital like trust. Just remember that the financial crisis basically is a crisis of trust and has caused the evaporation of thousands of billions of dollars. So understanding and protecting trust is really important. Creating this planetary nervous system is a CERN-like vision, like creating a measurement instrument for our social and economic world. And so we could create new compasses for decision makers. It would take into account not only GDP per capita, but also health, environment, and social and economic factors. So we have proposed, for example, to build observatories for a number of things, such as the financial system, or for international tension In fact, we've had a project where we mined millions of Google News articles, allowing us to find that it's possible to predict the probability of a war between countries given a certain measurement of tension. We can see here in particular on the right hand side how tension is spreading in space and time, so all of that becomes measurable. We can also measure global knowledge production and consumption. We can measure the spreading of ideas here in physics. So we're becoming powerful tools. Now, besides measurement based on data, we also want to do computer simulation using models to augment the data. However, the purpose here is not to build a crystal ball, but to make us aware of opportunities and risks and to design better manageable systems. How would we go about this? Well, first of all, it should become possible to integrate existing models of traffic and production, of economic systems, crowd behavior, social cooperation, social conflict, crime and war, and then scale it up to global scale. Of course, that wouldn't work very well in the beginning, as it was the case also for weather forecasts, but eventually the degree of detail and accuracy would be increased, and the money we put into this would pay back multifold. So, one study that we recently did is a study on the resilience of the European gas supply network. So we've been combining three kinds of data. Data about the major urban areas, data about the gas pipeline network, and about the population. And we've combined that with a distribution model. And by means of this, we could basically look at the resilience to certain kinds of political scenarios. And that work started 2 years ago, but it's kind of highly up to date now. We also need to be better than Google. And Google Flu Trends has been a great success, but now it's being criticized because it does have significant weaknesses. I can read about this in Science recently. But we can do better than this. Now, the problem is that air traffic has created a huge complexity of epidemic spreading. In fact, if you look at spatial-temporal spreading patterns, it's hard to make sense of it. And you can see these wide scattered plots over here. That means that, there is no correlation, basically. However, we were able to derive from the passenger streams between more than 4,000 airports in the world an effective distance measure, and within this effective distance measure we get linear dependencies, so a well-predictable situation, and we get a circular spreading pattern. That enables us to do two things: looking at data of an epidemics from all the 4,000 something airports, and identifying the most circular pattern will allow us to identify the outbreak location. Once we've done that, we can actually predict the further spreading into the future and say, okay, these are the cities that will be hit next by the flu. And we can put immunization doses and medicine and doctors into these places. We can prepare better. Another example, conflict in the Middle East. A great problem that's bothering us for many decades. Thanks to data about this conflict, it's been possible to us to come up with an agent-based model of conflict in Jerusalem. We're considering here different cultures, different religions, which is very important because the social distance actually matters a lot. After calibration and validation of the model, we can then look at counterfactuals. Political scenarios. We can compare, for example, the Clinton scenario with the business as usual. And we have also done a comparison with other kinds of political plans that have been debated. So we can take better informed decisions. And in fact, we can also get a better theoretical understanding of conflict. In many cases, actually, conflict results from attempts to create social order. That's why we punish people who deviate from our social norms. But if we have many cultures with different social norms, this punishment leads to conflict. Now finally, the global participatory platform. This is, why do we need it? It should enable people to take better informed decisions and allow them to contribute to their neighborhoods, to the society, the economy, and value generation. Why do we need to open up information systems for everyone? Well, look at this graph over here. It compares one line which doubles every 1.8 years, so that's computer power. There is another line, the green line, which doubles every 1.2 years. That's storage capacity of data. So eventually, storage capacity of data will overtake the processing power. And so we're getting from a situation where we didn't have enough data to take good decisions into a situation where we cannot touch all the data anymore and will pay too much attention to some problems. Then there's a third curve which shows a factorial function. And that's kind of measuring the systemic complexity as it grows while we're networking the world more and more. And so you can see that this is really a more or less explosive curve, and it will sooner or later lead to a loss of top-down control because it will really exceed processing power by far. So, how do we go about this? Well, I think the only solution to this is decentralization. It allows one to manage and harness the increasing level of complexity and diversity of global systems. And so, as complexity increases, the optimal goal achievement is reached by a higher level of autonomy. And here is a nice example that I've been working on for some time. Traffic control. Classically, traffic control is done in a top-down way by a control center that collects a lot of information from all over the city. But it's an NP-hard optimization problem. It cannot be solved in real time. We've been inspired by self-organization of pedestrians, where we have found that at bottlenecks there is a self-organized oscillation as if there was a traffic light. So we came up with a self-regulation of traffic flows, where traffic flows actually control the traffic lights. And as you can see over here, it creates wonderful green waves, a very nice coordination in the system. And there's even a patent available on this. Self-regulation is resource efficient and resilient to perturbations such as accidents or building sites. So we have actually compared three kinds of organization of a complex system. The top-down regulation, kind of a representative of the benevolent dictator. So we assume that the traffic control center really wants to do the best job they can. Then we compare that with travel time minimization at each single intersection. So we have a local control, but each intersection would independently do this optimization. So that could be compared with what Homo economicus would expect it to do. And then finally, a bottom-up self-regulation, which does the same thing. That means travel time minimization, but it also tries to coordinate with neighbors. And this is the outcome. So if you look at queue length as a function of capacity utilization, you see that top-down regulation is doing a reasonably good job, but selfish optimization, self-optimization based on a Homo economicus is doing a much better job. Up to a certain capacity utilization, where suddenly the queue length is exploding, and basically Adam Smith's invisible hand that coordinates traffic is breaking down. But the self-regulation manages to keep up Adam Smith's invisible hand kind of organization. So we're doing much better all over the capacity utilization. So surprisingly, bottom-up self-regulation can outsmart optimal top-down control. Now, next conclusion is the need of more participation follows from the need to move towards a more distributed control and decentralized management of complex systems. And what does it mean? Well, we need to create platforms to enable people to do the right thing. We need to create options and opportunities. And that's one of the reasons I believe why social media are so successful. And 3D printers are also along this way. So we're now seeing that the concept of prosumers is spreading. So consumers will not just be passively consuming, they will be also actively contributing to production. So some people speak about a democratization of production in this connection. Now I'd like to point out it's really time to create suitable institutions for the 21st century. Global, trustworthy, transparent, open and participatory ICT platforms. And Wikipedia would be a very good example for this, of course. Or OpenStreetMap, with more than 1 million volunteers contributing to this. So, if there is an earthquake somewhere, they will have an update within a very short time. This is the most responsive platform you can imagine. Or take GitHub, which is also very much a crowd-based platform. Now, there's a huge economic potential of opening up data. McKinsey has just published a report where they say 3.2 up to 5.4 trillions in economic value can be generated by open data per year. So this is a hell lot of money. And it requires basically to create an open participatory information system. Now, I'd like to finish with another line of thought which is about how our society will change. Because I do feel, I'm pretty convinced that information communication technology will fundamentally transform all our institutions. So we are at the beginning of a new age. And this is because, as I mentioned before, processing power is exploding and it will reach human brain power in about 10-15 years. And that basically means that computers will be as good as humans, or even better, doing many jobs, like all the jobs that are procedural. And we'll have a big data tsunami because within just a year we're now producing as much data as in the entire history of humankind. So how will that change our economy and society? Well, Kodak is probably a good example. They have among the most patents about digital cameras, but the change was so quick that they couldn't survive. They had 130,000 staff. Instagram had 13. So let's look at the development of economic sectors over time. And as we can see over here, as we've been moving from agricultural society to industrial society, to a service society, there have been huge changes. So agricultural production started with, say, 65% of jobs. Now it's down at about 3 to 5%. Industrial production was on the rise for a long time after the invention of the steam engine. But now it's largely dropping, and it will probably go down to 50% of this again. That means agricultural and industrial production together might just be 10% of all jobs. Now, it seems that fortunately the service sector is still on the rise, so there will be more and more jobs. But in fact, we have to take into account that there is a fourth sector now coming up, the sector of information and knowledge production. And so, actually, the service curve is already saturating, and it will go down, and probably will have 50% of that level in a couple of years. So there will be a huge transformation of our society. In fact, as I already indicated, all the institutions will change. Education, science, the way we move, the way we go shopping, the way we produce, health system, politics, the economy, the financial business, the insurance business, everything. Within just a few years. I would think 10 to 15 years, so we don't have much time. And in fact, it also poses a challenge to the United States, as we know, for example, from Detroit. Or even California is at the verge of bankruptcy. So, if we look into history at these different types of societies, based on these different sectors of production, then we see that we have actually transitions that never have been smooth. Yeah? So there have been always political disruption, financial crisis, economic crisis, in the worst case, revolutions and wars. And that's something that we certainly want to avoid. So we must prepare well in order to cope with that kind of situation. So we're coming from agricultural society, and now I compare with a kind of anarchical system where there was not much structure. Then there was a feudal society with top-down regulation or centralized control, which made place to an industrial society with a distributed control, and then service society based on administration and optimization. I believe we're now entering knowledge society, and my guess is that this will be based on social self-regulation and on collective intelligence. What really worries me is that we're now seeing so many social and political unrest all over the world. And you've probably been surprised as well, because we haven't had that for some time. And now it happens in many continents. So why is that? I think because we're most likely in different kinds of transitions all over the world. So Africa is in a transition from agricultural to industrial society. China might be in a transition from industrial to service society. And we are, the United States, Europe, Japan, are in a transition from service society to the digital society. Now, how do we deal with that kind of situation? Because if that happens all at the same time and in an uncoordinated way, there will be a real Armageddon. So we really need to prepare well, and we need to help each other. So basically, we need to help the other countries in their transitions with the knowledge we have about the way we can run an industrial or a service society. But at the same time, we also need to come up with a way to enter the digital society successfully. So future information systems, fortunately, can help us to manage these challenges, and we can create a lot of jobs with them. But we need to create the right settings. So we need to learn, and now I'm giving an example from the success of the age of automobile. We have to learn how to turn natural forces into power. Like we needed to invent motors, we needed to invent cars, mass production, we had to build public roads, or we had to learn how to refine oil to produce gas, we had to build gas stations, we had to build parking lots, we needed to introduce driving schools, driving license, speed limits, traffic regulations and control, and police. So it took a lot of things to make the age of automobile a great success. So what does it take to make the digital age a great success? It also requires a lot of institutions, in fact, that we need to build now. We have about 10 to 15 years of time. And so I think we should build the Internet of Things as a citizen web. We should build a planetary nervous system to make sense of what's going on in the world in real time. We need a new deal on data. as it is actually pointed out by this World Economic Forum report about the emergence of a new asset class when they talk about personal data. And there's this Consumer Data Privacy Bill of Rights that states, trust is essential to maintaining the social and economic benefits that network technologies bring to the United States and the rest of the world. So we need to have systems that we can trust. Privacy is needed for a number of reasons. Actually, to protect space to recover and to experiment, for conflict reduction, for creativity and innovation, and for happiness. And it's important for trustful relationships as well. So here is a nice quote from Barack Obama in the Consumer Privacy Bill of Rights, where he says, Americans have always cherished our privacy. From the birth of our republic, we assured ourselves protection against unlawful intrusion into our homes and our personal papers. At the same time, we set up a postal system to enable citizens all over the new nations to engage in commerce and political discourse. Soon after, Congress made it a crime to invade the privacy of the mail. And later, and so on and so on. So this is worth reading. And the question is, how do we get there? And if you want to have an age of big data that's compatible with informational self-control, then I think we need to build technology for a data purse, basically a mailbox for personalized data, allowing me to determine who can do what with my personal data. We would also need a micropayment system to provide rewards for those who collect useful data, who do innovations, and give them a benefit for sharing data and ideas. We need to build a global participatory platform and reputation systems, but pluralistic reputation systems to avoid the problem of filter bubbles. So we need to have diversity, an information system that harvests the diversity. So as we open up information, I think that will create an information innovation ecosystem that will create benefits for everyone, for politics, for business, for science, and for everyone. So that will drive a new kind of world, a digital world. And on top of this, we can build this living Earth simulator and interactive virtual worlds. And finally, social information technologies will support us. I'm concluding by saying we really need a joint global effort to master the global 21st century challenges and build the framework for the emerging digital age. Let's do that together. Together we could design more resilient, better manageable global socio-economic and information systems based on the principles of meritocracy, transparency, fairness, participation, trust and self-regulation, empowered by real-time adaptive feedback. I would love to discuss that with you in more detail. I'll be coming to New York and San Francisco, and there will be 2 public events, so please feel invited. I hope basically to be able to follow that up with you. And so I'd like to conclude by saying we need another Apollo project, but this time focusing on our Earth. I'm ready for this. Are you?